follows an extract from my book Fête Fatale, available from Amazon. Chapter 2, Part 1. The Mossleigh Women's Institute met on the last Friday night of each calendar month, and while the women met together, the men congregated in the Badger's Den, the local pub. So on the last Friday night of July, Beth, Emma and Kirsty walked along the high street to the village hall. Friendly greetings and a hot brew welcomed them into the hall, and Phoebe and Natalie strolled over to greet them. "Hello, you," barked Natalie in her usual stentorian tones. Natalie Lewis was a woman of indeterminate age. Everyone guessed that she must have been well along the way to meet her 70s, but her attitude and appearance resolutely clung to a much earlier stage in the journey. Her short, spiky hair gave no helpful clues either. In this particular instance, it was a determined purple hue, but the tint changed with alarming regularity and showed a total disregard for subtlety. In fact, the technique was positively brazen. Her vigorous outlook also belied her age, and nothing seemed to quench her. Both she and her husband, Terry, had always been indomitable. In the past, it wouldn't have been unusual to find them both lugging hods of reclaimed bricks down to the bottom of their garden because they fancied an outdoor pizza oven or a brick-supported bench in a particular spot of sunshine. They'd even laid their own driveway, cobble by cobble, with their own bent backs and fair hands. Out of the blue, Terry had suffered a stroke which had curtailed his home improvement ambitions, but even this hadn't halted them completely. The stroke had affected his left side, but he could still wield a drill single-handedly with his right hand, though tasks took longer to complete now. His one concession to the blow was that he needed a wheelchair for prolonged walking. None of this appeared to have altered Natalie's breezy outlook on life at all. Her only recognition of the misfortune was for her to shrug her shoulders a little and say, "Well, you've just got to get on with it." Trailing behind Natalie, owing to an absorbed interest in the obligatory slice of Victoria sponge, was Nicola Farrington. Nicola was the youngest member of Mossleigh Women's Institute. At only 22, she had it all to come, whatever it was. It was likely that she'd be more inclined to follow Natalie's example. At such a young age, she had surprised everybody by taking over an empty premises on the high street. After moving away to study for a degree in floristry at Ricehead Agricultural College, she had then come right back to the village with a devoted young man in tow and had launched her own floristry business. She had then caused further shock by taking private lodgings in the flat above the shop with her live-in partner, Gareth Foster. The fact that Gareth was a genuinely nice guy settled the matter, and he was soon embraced by the clientele of the Badger. Gareth was an accountant and was finishing his training at Shepherd's and Moss in Alderley. His firm but gentle oversight of the business would keep Nicholas safely on track. There was no opportunity for anything more than cursory hellos before the meeting was called to order and everybody found a seat. Natalie was known to slosh a healthy measure of single malt into her tea, and she was resolutely clinging to her cup as she took her place. The President, May Harland, opened the meeting, and Beth provided a rousing accompaniment to the usual rendition of Jerusalem, before May quickly got through the business of signing off the minutes from the last month and noting apologies of absence for this month. Only a couple were absent from this important pre-fête meeting. When it was announced that Betty Barnesford sent her apologies, there was an audible sigh of relief from the rows of chairs before the President's table. Betty, at 86 years old, was the longest-serving member of the Mossleigh WI, and matters were becoming very awkward. There was no doubt about it, but the fact that her mind was wandering made for considerable consternation. Whilst on a personal level, everybody genuinely liked Betty, it made organised activities very difficult. It was the same at rehearsals with the Templeton Singers. She'd been a member of the choir since it first began. No doubt Betty had sung Messiah more times than most had eaten hot dinners, but her enthusiasm was no longer matched by her ability, and she regularly launched into top A's, or close enough to A good bit or two before was strictly necessary. She was completely unabashed by these solo performances and enjoyed an embracing sense of abandon regardless of repeated exposure. Everybody was earnestly hoping that she would voluntarily step down from the public eye, as nobody wanted to hurt her feelings by having to ask her to leave in the end. Physically speaking, it was all getting too much, as surely she couldn't be expected to stand and sing for almost an hour before the interval at a performance, and she could no longer manage to climb the steps onto the stage. To be asked to resign would leave a bitter taste in everybody's mouth. The mystery was what could have kept her away tonight. Nevertheless, the atmosphere tangibly relaxed from that point on. "This month's meeting will not follow our usual procedure," said May. Some mild heckling from the back created a hiatus in the presentation. With a smile and a nod to the renegades, Beth and Kirsty, May continued. "We won't be entertaining a guest speaker or holding any demonstration activities. Instead, tonight will be given over wholly to the final preparations for our annual summer fête, which will be held in 3 weeks' time. As in previous years, we have opened out the event and invited other individuals and small groups to host a stall or attraction in exchange for a tithe of their takings on the day, and we also ask them to make a donation to our chosen charity. In order for everything to be properly organised, I suggest that we discuss each stall or activity in order, and each member responsible will come to the front to explain the protocol and answer any questions. We'll take a short break once we are about halfway through the agenda." Matters were dealt with efficiently, and the fête was organised with military precision. The Templeton singers were to showcase a few of their choral items, and, as May was deputy conductor of the choir, she could act as spokesperson here. She suggested that they sing Mozart's Ave Verum and Parry's I Was Glad. It was also decided that the fête would close with a performance of the Parry anthem Jerusalem, with which the WI was associated. All of this could successfully be carried out with relatively few singers and were all generally well known to the public. May's husband was the official accompanist for the choir and had consented to swallow his artistic pride, and for the sake of ease and economy would accompany the singers on a portable keyboard. Times at convenient points in the day were quickly decided on, and May agreed to take a list of volunteers at the end of the next choir rehearsal, making sure that those involved knew when and where to congregate. Nicola was next to take the floor. She had volunteered to hold a flower stall, and rumour had it that Betty had generously undertaken to cover the cost of stocking the stall so that Nicola's fledgling business wouldn't suffer. Nicola suggested that she would spend the days running up to the fête making arrangements to sell on the day, and would man the stall herself, as the Saturday girl and Gareth could manage at the shop. It probably wouldn't be too busy if all her potential customers were at the fête. Even so, she said, any offers of help in making the arrangements and manning the stall would be gratefully received. A few suitably skilled ladies offered to lend a hand during the week before the fête, and Nicola was reassured that she wouldn't be forgotten on the day. The next item on the agenda was Kirsty's long-awaited garden tour. The ladies noticeably sat up at the prospect of hearing what she had planned for the day, and all eyes were attentively on her as she took her place. "I photocopied some information sheets," Kirsty began. "I'm hoping that there'll be plenty of interest and we can divide into separate parties. I know that most of you have seen my garden and are generally aware of the information here, but perhaps some may want me to quickly run through the main points." At this point she cast an inquiring glance about the room. Her gaze was met by unanimous nods of approval. Even those who knew Kirsty's garden well were always eager to hear more about it. She nodded assent and continued. "The garden tour is divided into 4 main areas. If we split into separate groupings, no more than 4 can be escorted at any one time, so that we can rotate easily between sections without overlapping. There is a cultivated flower garden planted with various popular annuals. I've sketched out a basic diagram and labelled the flower areas, but I'm sure that you can easily spot begonias, fuchsias, busy lizzies and snapdragons for yourselves. Just around the corner is the herb garden, and again I've listed the names of the herbs and their typical uses. It's helpful if you don't rush visitors here so they can have a chat and a browse. Herb lore is really interesting, and although I've listed some uses of the herbs, you'll probably find that there are plenty of old tales surrounding each plant. Some applications are medicinal and some are cosmetic, but often the categories overlap. For example, chamomile tea is a well-known soporific, but it can also be used as a rinse for fair hair or an infusion with wheat oats for a relaxing bath soak. Feverfew is mostly used to alleviate headaches, but folklore also has it as an alternative to mothballs. Thanks to the recent TV dramas, some of these herbs have more sinister connotations, so linger around the poppies if you need to encourage some lively conversation. This raised a murmur of interested approval. Kirsty continued a verbal tour of her garden, moving on to the next section of garden. The rose garden is exactly what it says on the tin, but I have introduced another note into the equation, if you'll pardon the pun. All the rose bush names have a musical element. The full list is on the sheet and I'll attach a name tag to each rose bush. Varieties include names like Golden Mozart, Traviata and a cappella, which should generate some chit-chat. At the risk of being condescending, I've outlined some background information on each of these names. For example, a cappella literally means in the church style, but nowadays more generally means merely sung without accompaniment. The last section is the natural garden, and it's most obviously recognised by its more scruffy appearance. As the title suggests, I don't interfere too much here, but merely hold things at bay. Plant stalks, leaves and moss are largely left to provide shelter for small animals and nesting material for birds. I've planted a variety of purple plants to encourage bees to visit the garden. Foxgloves are left to prosper mainly because their prolonged flowering season gives the bees the longest harvest possible. Tradition has it that foxglove flowers are home to fairies. So as to create equal opportunities for the gnomes, I've allowed a few fly agaric mushrooms to nourish naturally beneath the silver birch tree, because we all know that's where gnomes live. This brought a ripple of laughter from the enthralled listeners. Be careful not to allow people to touch these, although if they do, they can just go and wash their hands. There's no real harm, but it's better to be on the safe side. Also, advise visitors to steer clear of the nettle patch so that nobody gets stung. I keep a healthy clump of nettles handy because I regularly harvest them and then allow them to rot down in a pail of water as a natural plant food. They also make a decent tea and excellent wine, but I don't keep them in the herb garden as they're not so pretty. Carlton has designed and printed some admission tickets to be sold on Nicola's stall, and visitors will need to hand these in at the garden gate for admission. Jean has kindly agreed to take in tickets and organise groupings, but if others could take a turn at the duty, then Jean can have a break and visit the fête. I'll be conducting tours for as long as necessary, so if there are any queries, I'll be on hand for you to just come and ask. For the full book of Fête Fatale, available in paperback or as an ebook, follow the link in the cards in the description box or find details on my website at sharonbill.com. Thanks for listening.